Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Don Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. It is October, and we have dedicated this month to mission enablers, sponsored by Exxon Technologies. So thank you, Exxon. And we have Titan Security on the show in the house today. So welcome Ryan Smith. He is the CEO, and what an incredible story and background you have, and what an incredible journey with your company. I can't wait to get into it. So welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. I've seen you guys all over the place, especially, of course, frequenting the drone responders summits and whatnot. So it's so great to talk to you here today about everything you're doing. But before we get into the company, Ryan, can you tell us first a little bit about your really incredible background?
Sure. No, thank you very much. Yeah, no, I've been involved in security and law enforcement since I was 18. I always wanted to be a police officer and started as a security officer at age 18. And I also have been flying piston single engine airplanes since I was 14. I had a grandfather that was involved in the FAA and kind of always in my blood. So really exciting for me professionally to put all of those things together, public safety and aviation, and seeing drones come together specifically with beyond visual line of sight and docking stations really helps us to scale that, and it's exciting times.
I love it. And, everybody out there, just as someone with Ryan's background normally does, he glossed over several really important things that I was very impressed when I read about your bio. SWAT team veteran.
Yeah, that was my my ultimate as a police officer. That was my ultimate dream. So I got to do that a little bit, and certainly enjoyed it. Yeah.
And defensive tactics instructor, conceal and carry instructor. I mean, the list goes on, and you've done so many things. Like you said, at some point, drones became part of the picture. Tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so when I started as a security officer in what the kids say the late 1900s, now it's adding up. I started in 1996. And what I noticed about the industry at that time was very bifurcated. You were either a integrator or you were a guards, gates, and guns type of person. So it was, one or the other. And as technology has proliferated, these things have come together. And when I started the company, that was kind of the vision. How do we put well-trained security officers, couple them with technology to be efficient and put those things together and blend those things? And that's kind of a common theme for our company. And that's kind of what got me going. And then, that obviously evolves into the drones and that type of thing. But remote guarding with security trailers, mobile surveillance units, monitoring of fixed cameras, and kind of blending those with on-site officers has been our secret sauce.
Yeah, I know, Ryan, when I first talked to your team before you came on the show, they were really foot stomping. Okay, Titan Security is not a drone company. It is, a full service security company. And, I think that goes without saying now that, you've kind of explained everything you do. And by the way, congratulations on your recent news. I know you landed amongst the top 25 security firms recently. And so I think that says a lot. But in terms of, you mentioned kind of this schism, right? You had the guns and guards and gates people. You had maybe the other folks. What gap were you really trying to fill as you created Titan?
Yeah, no, that's a great. And I think when you think about security officers, and thank you, that top 25 was a big milestone for us. That was, in North America out of 8,000 companies. And also,
Wow.
that's only the guarding piece. That doesn't have anything to do with the remote guarding or technology, which is, separate from that list. And so, um, I think when people think about the security guarding industry, they think of, mall cop, Paul Blart type of, hire by heartbeat type of thing. And
Yeah.
that's what I experienced as a police officer. And so starting the company, I thought there was a better way to do that. And for us, that was training and technology with the officers being able to, have a higher wage, having high expectations, we differentiate between security officers and security guards and think that the security officer has much more training, that type of thing. And I think the industry is moving from observe and report to observe and respond. They're looking for a little bit more out of the security professional. And the only way we could do that is to supplement them with technology and let the technology do the mundane, heavy lift part. But then there's still a last mile piece where that security officer needs to respond to what's going on, or if the drone detects something or that type of thing, there still needs to be a response. So coupling that together has really allowed us to save the customer money but increase security posture and increase the quality of the service, and we do that by blending those things together.
Well, that's amazing. And you kind of jokingly mentioned Paul Blart, fun movie, by the way.
It is.
And people do think, mall cops, but the reality is, and you're probably, well, I'm preaching the choir here. I think on the law enforcement side, they're having trouble filling their ranks, if I'm
Oh,
correct. And
oh,
so this idea of needing to hire private security, whether you're critical infrastructure, beyond the mall, let's call it beyond the mall,
right.
right, to enable a whole wide variety of missions. So on that note, as you look around and the customers you're working with, who are those stakeholders whose missions you're enabling through your services?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. When I started as a police officer in 2001, that was on the heels of 9/11, and
Wow.
people were lined up, and it was very competitive and tough to get on. And
Yeah.
now we see something different where they're almost hiring anybody that will take the job, as opposed to having being able to be selective with candidates and that type of thing. So definitely, and we're seeing that translate into the private sector, where people are having that we call the police for service, they don't have the resources to respond,
Right.
those type of things. So they really have to leverage the private sector. And so that drives business as well. You know, they're needing to lean or look for other resources that aren't being handled by, what the police used to do, or how they were able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people don't realize this crazy statistic that I think over 80% of critical infrastructure in our country is privately owned. And when you think about critical infrastructure, what does that even mean? DHS has a great website, by the way, and they kind of break it out in 16 sectors, everything from schools, to the things you think about, like, the power grid,
Hmm.
to transportation, and the list goes on and on. So, these are all folks that need to protect their assets. I mean, they're national assets, right? So, really important. So let's talk about the technology. From what you mentioned, it's kind of like all the things, right? We've got the static cameras, we've got now we've got drones,
Right.
and at some point that kind of entered the picture, and you guys are doing what other people are just talking about now. I think this idea of drones as a service. So what is it, and what does that model look like for clients?
Yeah, no, that's something we've seen some success with, as far as customers, as they start to look at ways to protect their property. And certainly as drones are coming into the picture, when folks start digging into what's involved with that, as far as putting a program together,
Yeah.
the complexity of that, the regulations, the staffing that you would need, insurance and training and pilot, fleet maintenance, this types of things, they quickly realize there's a lot going on there. And so we've had a lot of success just putting that together as a package, a drone as a service, where the customer just pays one monthly fee. We provide all that complexity, and we have economies of scale of grouping those things together. They enjoy those savings. They also enjoy all of the data. They can see the stream, they can keep the recorded footage. So they get all of the benefits of it without the cost, headaches, or liabilities that go along with that. So we've seen a lot of customers adopt the as a service model.
Very, very cool. And that model is it's an important one for so many people, because from your perspective, Ryan, I don't know that that's going to get easier. Certainly for the customer, if they were trying to do it on their own, it won't. Everybody looked to Part 108 as being, oh, it's the holy grail beyond visual line of sight. It's going to change the game. But the comments are in. We'll see what happens with them. Of course, we'll see what happens with the government and whatnot. But a lot of people were are concerned on the security side, whether law enforcement or otherwise, that the rule was written more so for those commercial drone delivery people and requiring things like TSA, like level 3 security clearances for anybody that touches anything that's being, I mean,
Right.
it's just kind of an interesting time. So for your team to take that on, whatever that's going to look like in the end, instead of the individual customer stakeholder, I think is going to be also a great benefit for them. So I'm curious, Ryan, like everybody's talking about DFR, right? Drone as first
Mhm.
responder. In terms of your drone as a service model, is that something or like an equivalent? Like we all know DFR is like the 911 call comes in and then the drone
Mhm.
goes out, provides SA, situational awareness. Um, are you doing something kind of equivalent of that in terms of this service model? Or is that something kind of on the whiteboard?
No, we do. We call it ARP, and everybody loves their acronyms. And
ARP.
ARP is Automated Response and Patrol. And
Oh,
for
the
our
ARP.
purposes, and we leave space. We call that automated because we're leaving space for ground-based robots that I think will be part of the equation at some point, and already are, to some degree.
Right.
But basically, for what we do, the drone serves two purposes. It's either patrolling, looking for suspicious activity or unwanted activity, or it's responding to a triggering event that tells it that there's something that needs to be investigated. So, um, for our purposes, ARP is kind of what the drone does in the security landscape.
Okay, the ARP. And in
Yeah.
terms of uh, other three-letter acronyms, I'm going to throw out DIB, right? Drone in a box.
Hmm.
Is DIB part also of your automated response patrol model
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, it's a great. I've been following this whole drone thing since I got my first drone, I think in 2010, 11, somewhere in that piece. And
Right.
everything that we've needed revolves around beyond visual line of sight. It does not make sense for us to have, a pilot on the ground visual line of sight. We want to augment, supplement or offset the on-site personnel. And now that we're getting a viable path, we got a national, we were the first security company to get a national beyond visual line of sight waiver towards the end of last year, which really allowed us to scale this. And detect and avoid was a piece of that. And so beyond that, once you have beyond visual line of sight, then you need an operations center and you need a docking station. And I think those two things are not getting enough attention. Currently, everybody's focused on the regulation, beyond visual line of sight and that type of thing. But you don't have beyond visual line of sight with either of those two things, the operating center or the docking station. And to
Right.
your point about Part 108 and delivery and that type of thing, part of our comments to the NPRM was we feel contained operations should be separated from uncontained operations. Flying over people, flying long distance is a much more complex and different than being on private property that's contained, that has almost no risk to the general public. We're flying shielded at 50 feet. We're arguably not even in the airspace. So I think those, regulations should be much different. We
Yeah.
also, notice too that there is a lack of, and I know the FAA is trying to push ownership of operations to a company or an entity as opposed to individual pilots, which is why they want to have everything automated.
Right.
But we still need to take manual control for investigatory purposes. If we see something that happens or something we need to maneuver around, we're doing that currently under our waiver and on contained operations, very safely and hopefully continuing to do so. But I think they're very different. And we call it contained operations because I feel like there's several other use cases: agriculture, inspection, construction, these types of things that we feel are very different. So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate through that.
Yeah. I mean, all great points. And, drone responders I know had very similar comments as well in terms of, well, look, we need to definitely take over manual control at some point, and yay autonomy, but let's
Right.
not forget that sometimes it does call for, the operation of the mission does call for some kind of a remote pilot engagement. So
Right.
great stuff, great stuff. So in terms of what you're doing today, with ARP, drones as a service, how would you say that model reduces security costs compared to traditional methods?
Oh man, that's a great question. So the security industry mostly looks at the health of their company by billable hours, right? You put
Oh,
a that's how we price our service. A customer says, I want to have a security officer from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and
okay.
they are provided an hourly price. There's a lot of waste in that hour. The security officer may patrol around a property once an hour or a half hour, but then, what are they doing in between? They can't cover all sides of the property. So I really think the remote guarding piece, we allow, the technology, the cameras, the drones, the AI do the heavy lifting of sorting through that and then looking for, the signal out of the noise type of thing. And then we raise that needle to the human operator, whether that be in our pilot center where they do an audio intervention or talk down, which is a very powerful deterrent, or whether we're just sending the officer. We have patrol officers that are moving around different properties. And so we can move them to where there's activity as opposed to them just sitting on the site waiting for something to happen. And so we can do that for, as much as 60% reduction in cost. And also, we feel increasing the security efficiency and posture at the property as well.
Well, that's great. And these robots, whether drones, whether uh, you know, quad UGVs, like the Spot Dog, etc. They're
Mhm.
all about just collecting the data, right? Now you use the buzzword of the year, AI. Can
Mhm.
you tell us? So, how are you leveraging AI then in your process to help with something like what you just mentioned?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to too, when we started monitoring fixed cameras, and that's kind of the same thing as the cameras are just recording, but you still need a person or a human in the loop that's going to take that and evaluate and find out whether that needs further action or that type of thing. And I think that still is in play when the drone conversation as well. But
Yeah.
what we're seeing in video analytics would be able to detect a person or a vehicle, but in certain situations, I heard somebody talk one time about, if you remember the shooting at the MGM in the concert in Las
Oh,
Vegas.
yes. Yeah.
So typical kind of like if the cameras are looking at somebody going in and out of a room 10 times or moving around on a floor, you would become inundated with the amount of alerts because people are moving around constantly. But as the AI can look at that and say, well, that person's been in and out of their room 10 times in the past 30 minutes, then a human can look at that and say, oh, that's maintenance working on a room, or that's a person carrying large bags that look like firearms. We can investigate that and maybe make that more preventative than it would be, looking at it after the fact. And so we're seeing behavioral analytics, proliferate and really get good at things like that. And we're seeing the drone video analytics used to work by it would learn a scene and it would learn what the pixel shape of a person or a vehicle would look like, and it would alert based on that. And
Yeah.
we're starting to see that get much more complex. Drones have a challenge. They're a flying camera, so the scene is constantly changing as it's moving. But
True.
we're seeing that. We had one the other day at a very large property, a 200-acre property that has a lot of homeless issues and this types. And as the drone flies by, you can't detect people that were there, but the AI saw it, noted the operator who zoomed in, saw three individuals that were trespassing on the property and able to do it. So the AI is doing a lot of that heavy lifting, sorting, doing different things. We're seeing, it can do a patrol and send you a text report to tell you exactly what's going on. A garage door was left open. There's an occupied vehicle on the property. So it's learning all of these different things and getting much better at raising that needle to the human in the loop.
That is really, really cool. AI is making such a difference across so many different sectors. It makes sense. I think you called it behavioral. It's almost like pattern of life,
Mm-hmm.
as I think about it, kind of back to my military days. But when a customer contacts you, what is that setup process? When a company brings you in for security with, including with drones, like obviously you're leveraging all kinds of different technologies, but what is that process?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, back to that earlier conversation about being one or the other, you're either an integrator or you're a guarding company.
Right.
It would put that company in their prescription would be either one of those things, right? And so now having the ability to blend these things together, we call it kind of the Goldilocks effect of being able to take their budget, their threat picture, their culture, what they're looking to do, and then put the best prescription together based on all of those things. So it gives us a much wider, scope of things that we can apply and how we can kind of put those things together for the right solution for the customer, whether that be budget, what they've got to work with. And certainly some things when we think about from a drone perspective, size of property, number of risks, budgets, these types of things. We have some formulas that we work with customers on to really identify which products or services would be the best fit for what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're interested in talking at all about some of the technologies that you guys on the integration side that you're using. Because I've seen you guys at different shows with certain drones there.
Mm-hmm.
Are you always actively looking around, like what's the next new thing? Or in terms of partnerships, obviously you're always looking for stakeholders that want to employ you for your security services. But are you also in that kind of B2B space of looking for other technology companies to partner with,
Oh,
Ryan?
yes. Yes, very much so. And because that is changing so quickly that we're always, looking at what's the best product and are we still at the leading edge of what's available and what's out there. So that is a constantly shifting conversation and something that we continually are always talking with different partners and having different conversations with, for sure.
And we're talking about integration. You go into, whether it's a farm, whether it's a construction group on their site to assist with their security needs. The military in particular is talking about this modular open systems approach, right? MOSA.
Mm-hmm.
People come to you with their own systems. How do you kind of connect what you're doing with their systems in terms of, integration?
We take kind of more of the Android than the Apple approach in the sense that we try and fit into a customer's box as opposed to the other way around. So a
Yep,
lot of
yep.
that, as far as what they integrate with and what platform they use or what technology they want to use, that's kind of a two-way conversation of what we've learned and what works and what they're already using. There's a lot of that too, and I think a lot of customers struggle with that. Is they have a lot of technology, but they struggle with how do we put it together in a meaningful or useful way. And a lot of times it's not ripping out the technology they have.
Right.
It may be using that or adding a software piece here and there to tie it together. But we try and take a holistic approach and really look at what's available. What can we currently use as opposed to adding more equipment? We're much more of a service provider than we are, an equipment provider. We kind of focus more on the output than the input, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And, it's just like problem solving on a daily basis.
Yep.
But, you guys are doing security. But one of those key things in terms of data is always cybersecurity. So
Hmm.
how are you addressing that in your operations?
We typically will supply our own network, whether that be Starlink, cellular, that type of thing. It seems
Mhm,
to be a safer scenario where the only thing that's on the network that we're dealing with is the equipment that we're dealing with. And
mhm.
it also keeps the IT department, or the department of no that we sometimes call it, out of the conversation to where they don't have concerns about us being on them. We could VPN, we could segment on a network, we can do all sorts of things that, we are on customers' networks quite often, but that depends on their culture, their sensitivity, their risks and those type of things. But the easiest way we've found is just keep the equipment on its own network and just bypass it altogether.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of everything else you're doing, you've used this term more than once now, and I'm going to repeat it, this blended approach. I think we have a really interesting video to roll about.
This is Titan Protection. You and the beanie by the car. Identify yourself. Identify yourself.
All right, very, very cool. So, at its heart, that is really what you're doing, this kind of integration, guarding, plus technology combination. Tell us a little bit about that video and, you know, what we were seeing there.
Yeah, that was kind of a quick highlight reel of a couple of you know, actual scenarios that happen as the drone's out. Some of those you saw were, you know, the spotlight showing Overwatch as they're dealing with something. One in particular was a homeless encounter that they had. He was holding a machete. The drone was over top, and the spotlight was lighting the area while the officers were contacting and kind of integrating there. And that blended approach is definitely a big point for us. You know, and when we talk about technology and kind of thinking and AI, and as that's getting for it, you know, it's getting a lot of conversation about, is AI replacing people, and is it, you know, how is that going to you know, change the landscape? And I think, at least for the foreseeable future, and I think arguably that could be 10 years or it could be 50 years, you're still going to have that human in the loop where you need somebody that's going to respond, call the police, evaluate the information, and you know, kind of take action from there. So believe very, very firmly that it's a blended approach of those things. And I think the right blend really depends on a lot of factors with the customer, as far as their culture, their budget, you know, some of those things we talked about earlier. But getting that blend right is an important, and I think key to success from a security standpoint.
Now, you also, we talked about your recent headline in terms of top security company, but you also recently made headlines for being the first of its kind deployment at an auto dealership. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was kind of that's an interesting one, and one of the things that we're seeing an application that the drone is really doing well at is when we have an outdoor property where they've assigned 2 officers to it, and that was a scenario that this happened as well. Because what happens a lot of times is they put a security officer on a site, they continue to have issues, they add a second one, so they've doubled their cost. Traditionally, unless you have a really strong management of those officers while they're on site, they bunch up, they talk, you know, they're spending most of their time in the same spot, as opposed to really walking around and being, you know, all places. And even both people on a large property can't cover all things. So
Right.
what we've done, and in that scenario with that car dealership, they were having significant theft issues. They had 2 officers that were that were assigned to the property, continue to have the issues. When we were talking to them, we suggested one of our officers on the site for that last mile, kind of patrolling, checking gates, interacting with customers or people on the property, and then having the drone also. So we created a virtual perimeter around this property, and it was over a mile long. It's a very large property. And we put thermal radar around so that anytime after hours somebody came on the property, the drone would deploy. We could get eyes over top of it, and then also direct the on-site officer as a resource to interact with that as well. And that's gone very well. The customer, you know, it saved them a considerable amount of money, about $100,000 a year compared to what they were doing with the 2 officers.
Yeah.
And they were having about 10 incidents per year of stolen autos and different things that were costing them about 6 figures in insurance claims and that type of thing. And within the first couple months, knock on wood, we haven't had any issues. We prevented a theft that was in progress. We've also prevented several as they come onto the property, people that were, you know, trespassing. They could potentially steal cars or that type of thing. We were able to avert them and get them off the property through audio interventions and coordinating with the security officer. So definitely a good use case, and I think a scenario where we were able to increase their security posture but reduce their costs. And that you know, is typically doesn't work that way. Usually you're increasing security coverage and services, you're increasing costs, but this was kind of that rare occasion where we were able to put it all together for them. And again, they have access to the video and everything else, but they just pay a monthly fee of around $6,500 per month. That included the full radar perimeter, the drone, that type of thing, where they were paying around $13,000 for that additional officer. So just for some numbers to consider, that's about what they were paying, but very successful use case.
Oh, that's incredible. I think as I'm listening to you, man, the military needs to take a page out of your playbook. And I feel like ARP is like the my brain is not working with all the 3-letter acronyms,
Yeah.
but drone DFR.
Right.
ARP is like DFR on steroids because the trigger isn't someone like actively making a phone call into 911. It's something like thermal radar that's just like triggering the technology to deploy. Like, wow. I mean, taking autonomy to the next level in terms of security, what you're doing is incredible. And I think that use case is critically important. And the fact that, like you said, I'm not doing public math here, but at least by half of the cost.
Right.
Um, so woohoo, good for you. I
Right.
mean,
That's
you know,
exciting.
I don't know about on the battlefield, and I can see where maybe in a deployed scenario like this kind of a system would be useful. But for sure in the homeland CONUS, continental United States,
Yeah.
all those bases that these military commanders need to be protecting, and how do they do it well? This is, I think, a perfect solution. So really, really cool what you're doing. Hats off to you. This blended approach, leveraging all kinds of technologies, and then keeping those humans in the loop. Which I agree with you, Ryan. I don't know about 10 years. I feel like it's going to be long. Maybe I'm Pollyannish about this, but I don't know. AI is going to take over everything, right? I
Right.
still feel like those humans in the loop are really key. So that's awesome. So you've done so much, as you look ahead, we're on the cusp. We're in quarter 4. We're on the cusp of a new year.
Right.
As you look ahead, what are you thinking in terms of maybe an evolution in what you guys are doing?
Sure. I think for us looking down the road, the biggest thing that we're looking at and working towards is one to many. I don't think that, and we've seen that crawl, walk, run approach with the drones, and how do you, start small and kind of, move forward, and that framework or model seems to work. But I think we're starting to get into the run phase. And I think everybody has talked about, now we're in a one-to-one pilot to drone scenario. The next step is going to be one to many, and then eventually none to many. And I think arguably that timeline is, subjective as far as when the none to many comes. But we are very focused on one to many because as we scale our operation, we get much more efficient if we can have one operator handling multiple drones. So that's something that we're watching very closely. That seems to come down a lot to the software platforms that we're using and our ConOps more than the technical capabilities of the drone. I think the FAA wants to see, okay, if you have a problem with one drone, what do you do with the other ones that are in the air, and how do you address those things? And I think that's kind of the next frontier, especially from a regulation standpoint, for the industries to scale.
Well, you mentioned earlier this idea of you can't really do beyond visual line of sight without an ops center.
Mhm.
And how are you guys leveraging an ops center right now
Yeah,
as you posture yourself to one to many? Because for sure you cannot do one to many without an ops center. But
right.
you're doing ARPs presumably now with this ops center. Tell me a little
That's
bit
right.
more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a very natural progression for us, and one that kind of motivated us to really follow the drone thing. Is we already had the operation center. We were monitoring fixed cameras in our operation center since 2012 and have expanded that. We monitor several thousand cameras across all 50 states currently. So we were already kind of down that path. We had a 24/7 operation. How do you staff? How do you train? How do you deal with those things? It's something that I think the security industry is very strong in and brings a lot of value to this drone conversation. We've been operating operation centers for years. And so, one of the things that I thought lacked in the ARC report and some of the Part 108 stuff is a little bit more guidance on the remote operations center. We're 5 Diamond UL listed, meaning that we have, redundancy and internet, power backups. We have contingency plans for disasters. We're in the Midwest in Kansas City, so tornado being a threat. What happens if a tornado takes us down?
Mhm.
Or we lose power when a drone's in the air. These are things that I think folks need to think through, and it's one side of this equation that's not getting much attention. But that's kind of what naturally led us into that. Staffing, turnover, training, these types of things, equipment needed for that type. These are all things that need to be thought through, and especially too, Most of our operations happen at night. So depending on the use case, somebody's operation center may need to only operate during the day. Ours needs to be 24/7, 365, regardless of weather, holidays, these types of things, and something that we had been doing for years. So kind of came naturally.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So just another thing a customer or stakeholder can leverage. So in terms of that, since we have a global audience out there, are you operating beyond the United States, Brian, with your Ryan, with your ops center, or is it mostly focused on U.S.?
Currently, mostly focused in U.S. We're having some conversations in Canada, and have had some conversations around some other South American, African countries, but haven't done anything yet. But certainly open to those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I can in my brain, I'm thinking mining. When you
Mining,
think
yep.
Australia, you think Africa, you think the energy sector and all of those things, big up in Canada, of course, and everywhere. So makes sense that you'd be in your the arc of your story, that is the next logical step to go more international. So with the folks listening out there today, who, if you were speaking to them directly, who would be the ones that you would say, hey, you should really consider working with us?
Well, for sure, anybody that's got outdoor assets and they're interested in protecting them, that's kind of our bread and butter, whether that be through fixed cameras, mobile surveillance towers, or drones. That's definitely, construction, auto dealerships, transportation, the energy sector, utilities, these types of things have been the customers that we're serving currently. But happy to have that discussion with anybody. Having the in-house or out-house, the operation center is something that, again, you're able to leverage the drone as a service, not having to spin up your own remote operations center, not having to deal with the turnover, the overnight operations, these types of things. But you still get access to all the data. We are doing partnerships with customers that are using our services and still have their own security operations center and just don't want to deal with the piloting side or the liability or these types of things. So happy to have that discussion with anybody that has any interest in that or issues. Especially a lot of times our phone rings after something bad happens. So certainly if anybody's having theft issues or trespassing issues, be happy to help with that. But also would urge folks that to have that discussion before bad things happen and kind of think about their security posture and their picture just holistically. And again, happy to have that discussion with anybody.
Yeah, I would think it would save you money to, and that, what do they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's right.
But you talk quite a bit about the training that you do with your own team, Ryan. Do you also then, say with the blended approach, right?
Mhm.
Even the auto dealership, as an example, you had one of your people, but they had still at least one of theirs. Do you also then train the other individual on your, let's say, ConOps or concepts of operations or tactics, techniques, and procedures for that interoperability?
Sure, and that again would depend on the organization and kind of if they have an in-house team or if they have different stakeholders they would like us to work with. We kind of customize that to their needs. Some people want to be completely hands off and say you guys handle all the dirty work, and other people really want to have a collaborative effort. We train our security officers with a scenario-based system that the instructor can change and put them in a scenario and then have the person on the screen comply or not comply. And sometimes we do that with customers. We may have a security officer at a school or a facility where the front desk has to interact with folks, and we do de-escalation training, different things. We're able to put scenarios in place and kind of tabletop exercises and do. So training is definitely a big part of our DNA and part of the ongoing security relationship with our customers.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, especially given your background and given the things that you either prevent or catch in progress, as you talked about that auto theft in progress that you guys were able to help intercept. How I assume you work very routinely with state, local, tribal, territorial police officers as well with these stakeholder companies or organizations you're working with. once that crime has occurred, you're handing things off, I guess, maybe to the locals?
Yes, yeah, certainly. That's a big part of our training program is how do we be an advocate and a positive influence when we're interacting with law enforcement, not creating a mess that they have to come clean up. So, we're very focused on gathering information and being evolved enough. It's a balance of not doing too little and not doing too much. And so we spend a lot of that scenario based training is a lot of what we do. But that's a big part of the equation is kind of liaison with the local law enforcement and the folks that are on the ground and coordinating all that together. And especially we're seeing that even more so with drones where they may have some shared opportunity to use some of those resources or have some collaboration with some of that is coming up more and more.
Well, and again, I don't know if you know that I'm an attorney, and I used to prosecute crimes, at least in the military and as an assistant U.S. attorney. So putting on my attorney hat and the data we talked about that's being collected, I assume that you guys can also create with whatever software you're using reports if needed to hand off, or if there is video footage that's going to be key to a prosecutor in a particular case, that you're able to also work with the company, work with what you have, and the law enforcement to kind of facilitate all of that.
Yeah, very much so. And we're seeing a lot of that. One of the things that the drone does well is that ease of sharing information. You can share a video through a link, either a live stream and that benefits the officers as they're arriving, or it may be evidentiary after the fact. So being able to share those and compile those together is also a big part of the equation.
All right,
And
great.
privacy, the privacy piece you touched on as well is a big one that I think works both ways. When we were starting to get insurance policies on our fleet, the insurance companies used to be mostly worried about, is the drone going to fall out of the air and hit somebody? And as we've had more and more flights and they're realizing that risk is a lot lower than they anticipated, their focus now is privacy. How are we storing images? How are we making sure that our operators aren't zooming cameras into the property across the street and looking in windows and these types of things? And I think that's a very important part of the equation as we're setting the table, essentially, as this is a new service that's getting out there and these are new tools that are very powerful. We need to make sure that we're doing that in the right way and again, setting the table correctly so that we have the right training, the right audit mechanisms that are in place. Sunflower Labs has a really good, where they put a geofence around a property. As the drone's flying around, anything on the outside of that geofence is automatically blurred. So it kind of takes that off of the equation. I think there's some interesting things that can be done from a software perspective, but privacy is definitely a big part of the equation as well.
Yeah, that is, I mean, across the board, right? That's a huge issue. So I love that you're being proactive in that regard. I know when I was in the DoD and I was helping write some of those policies about domestic use of UAS, it was always, retention, dissemination, minimization. How are you doing all of those things? Whatever policies you have to address those in terms of privacy. So that's amazing. All right, Ryan, this is crazy. I knew we would get short on time. We are almost at the end of our time together. It's been really interesting to me to hear all the things you guys are doing in the security space and how you've embraced not just drones, but AI and a whole bunch of other enabling technologies, really leveraging autonomy with this blended approach. We're at really not just the end of the show, but we're almost at the end of the year. I'm going to ask you this one, so I'm going off script, my friend.
Go ahead.
As you look back on this year, what is the one thing that you are maybe the most proud of in terms of what Titan Security has been able to achieve?
Man, I mean, when I said that I've been working on this drone thing since 2012, the thing that I would say I'm most excited about over the last year specifically, we've made the most progress. 80% of that progress over that 10, 15-year period happened in the last year. And that for us was getting our beyond visual line of sight waiver, which allowed us to scale this as opposed to doing the site by site waiver, having to employ detect and avoid, these types of things. So really being able to get out on the forefront of it and being able to scale and see it working. My biggest fear was, I love drones, I love aviation, I love security. I wondered, is this just cool tech, or are customers going to really find value in this? And we're seeing that kind of hockey stick adoption of people are getting their hands on it. They're really seeing value in it, and it's a scaling and adopting. So, being able to see it go from, thought to proof of concept, and to really see it start to scale and become real and have some real tangible wins, deterring and intervention and thefts, is probably the most exciting piece over the last year for sure.
Well, that's great. For me, Ryan, I gotta say, you guys did something I've never seen anybody else do, and it was absolutely hilarious. And that is what I'm going to remember you for also this year is your drone in a box video. We're going to pop up the picture. For those that have not seen this, it was all over LinkedIn, going viral. These guys actually worked a drone in a box parody video with a significant Kansas City based director who's also been involved in music videos like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Lil Wayne. And I'm just telling you, this was hilarious. So I love that skit when it was on SNL. And for you guys to do that just shows to me you have this great sense of humor. But at the same time, clearly with your background and everything you're doing, you're taking it seriously. So thanks for bringing some levity to the industry and to the very serious work that you do.
Well, no, I appreciate that. And that's that couples in that discussion around the box is a very important component to, this application of beyond visual line of sight. It doesn't happen without the box. And so, looking forward to that expanding and in options expanding as well. But we just wanted to bring some levity and shine a light on that part of it. But I appreciate you saying that.
I love it. And boom. So, all right. How can people reach you? How can they learn more and find out?
Sure. Yeah. Our website, tpcsecurity.com, is a great resource, as well as LinkedIn, and in our social channels, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, those types of things, LinkedIn as well. And we're also starting a working group in the security sector that's just working on, standards, training, different resources like that. So anybody that's interested in joining that conversation as well, we have that going on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, great. We're going to keep watching. We're going to follow. And thanks for taking the time and telling us all about Titan Security. It's been awesome. So thank you, everybody else out there as well. That's all she wrote. We are out here.